Welcome to the American Hotel. I stood here last on February 27th, 2020, 595 days ago. And I just want to say what a pleasure it is to see all of you in this room today. Thank you. It's really nice to be back. My name is Gavin. I'm the co-publisher of the Express News Group, which includes the Sag Harbor Express, the Southampton Press, and the East Hampton Press. A lot has happened over those 595 days. Though some things were as clear then as they are today. Bob Plumb, who is on our panel today, was also on that panel 595 days ago, where we were talking about the communities of Sag Harbor Hills, Nineveh, and Azurest. And at that event, Bob said, "It goes without saying the spirit you are trying to preserve is obviously important." But he added that trying to translate that into a protective code is not easy. He was just a rookie trustee at the time of those comments, but here we are nearly 2 years later having a very similar conversation. Before we get started with that, I'd like to thank our sponsors who are not just financial supporters of these events, but true partners in community engagement. Our presenting sponsor of the Express Sessions is Rocco Carriero Wealth Partners. They have offices in East Hampton and Southampton. Rocco often joins us, but he couldn't be here with us today. But he is a comprehensive wealth advisor. He works with business owners, CEOs, entrepreneurs. He's a published author. He's made lots of appearances, and he really cares deeply about the East End community and cheers for the success of our local businesses. So thank you to Rocco and his team for their support. We'd also like to thank our session partners, the Adam Miller Group, which is a law firm based in Bridgehampton. Adam could not be here today, but Brian Lacazio and Haley Willis are with us, and we thank them for our support. Thank you very much. Also joining us is Chris Nuzzi, who is an executive vice president with Advantage Title, which is another longtime sponsor with East End offices in Riverhead and East Hampton. Chris is also a former Southampton town councilman, so he is certainly familiar with the kind of conversations we're having here today. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Advantage Title. I just want to add that those three sponsors stuck with us throughout the pandemic. We moved these events online, on Zoom. I'm very happy that we're not doing that right now. But they were with us from the beginning, and it's very, very much appreciated. Lastly, I'd like to thank the crew from LTV, Jason Nauer, Michael Clark, these fine gentlemen who are with us today. They record these sessions, and we share them with everybody who could not join us. So thank you to LTV. Now on to today's discussion. It's no secret to anyone in this room that Sag Harbor Village has been under tremendous development pressure as it has emerged over the last 10 or 20 years into a world-class resort destination. Property values have soared, shops and restaurants have come and gone, but the soul of the village, thankfully, has remained, and the heart of that village is our waterfront. We are here today to discuss a proposed new zoning law that would encompass a newly drawn waterfront overlay district. It's a conversation that stretches back over a year through 2 administrations with a revised law just recently introduced under the leadership of a new mayor. And that mayor is here on our panel today. I'd like to introduce right now, Jim Larocca, the new mayor of Sag Harbor Village. Jim, welcome. Also joining us is Sag Harbor Village Attorney Elizabeth Vail. Liz, thank you for joining us. The aforementioned trustee, Bob Plumb. Bob, thank you for joining us. We also have Nat Egosi. Nat is a native of Sag Harbor who owns the Sag Harbor Inn, which is on the waterfront, of course, as well as another building just a few doors down here on Main Street. Nat, welcome. And lastly, Susan Mead, who is a former member of the Sag Harbor Zoning Board of Appeals, as well as an attorney with a rich understanding of land use management. Susan, thank you for joining us. I just want to say at the start here, before I turn things over, that we're not here today to talk about specific applications or businesses or projects. It's really to get a better understanding of the proposed zoning code. So we're just going to try to stick to that today. If everybody could respect that, it would be appreciated. I want to recognize Ellen Dioguardi, our Director of Events, who makes this engine run. Ellen, thank you very much. And Stephen Coates, who's a staff writer for us. He covers Sag Harbor Village and will be providing coverage of this event in next week's papers. Thank you, Steve. And lastly, I'd like to introduce and turn the mic over to the moderator of the event, our executive editor of the Express News Group, Joe Shaw. Joe?
Thank you, Gavin. Everybody vaccinated, right? We're all good? I'm double and boosted myself, so. This is odd, because we've been doing this for almost 2 years now. Feels like, it hasn't been 2 years, I don't think, but it feels like 2 years, virtually, and the differences are significant in doing it live. One of them is I'm actually wearing pants, and I hope everybody else is too. And the second thing is I don't have a mute button, so that's going to be a challenge for me. I'm going to have to try and manage this without a mute button. We are going to have a conversation, and we want you all to be part of it because of the obvious restrictions. What I'm going to do is walk towards you. If you have a question, you can raise your hand and let me know. I will walk towards you and point the microphone at you from a distance, and I'll ask you to speak as loudly as you possibly can so that the mic can try and pick you up, but we're going to avoid passing the mic around for, as I said, obvious reasons. We're going to go till about 2 o'clock today, and we do encourage the audience to participate. We're going to open it up to questions after just a few questions to get everything rolling. So, any questions before we get started? Okay, so let's start with Mayor Larocca. Jim, as you put forward this waterfront code proposal, you had to be guided by a vision of some sort for what you're hoping to have on at the end of this process. Can you try and sort of outline what you want this to accomplish in broad strokes for the waterfront?
Thank you, Joe, and good afternoon, everybody. I came onto the board originally by appointment of Mayor Schroeder, and it was because she wanted me to work on the waterfront. I'm a boat guy, I have experience in government, and she felt at the time that we didn't have all the tools we needed to be prepared for the next wave that was clearly coming to the village. And so I've been involved on waterfront issues more than any other since I became a trustee. When I inherited this effort underway, I felt that it needed some tuning. And the tuning was, first of all, to include the entire waterfront, or at least the entire commercial waterfront, which the original design did not. And so that's one of the changes that you'll find. I thought years ago when I was first around that the idea of having a special process for large developments or a special additional process made a lot of sense. We tried it then, we failed. We've brought that back here so that the Board of Trustees will be directly involved at the end of the process for buildings, commercial or residential, over 3,500 square feet. The other tools relate to more of the detail of size and dimension and all the rest, but the entire package and the vision, if there was one, was to give us a stronger hand as the value of these properties continue to accelerate and the interest in them. There are more people circling the village now than ever before. And so the intent was to give us a stronger hand to moderate, if you will, the next level of development and making sure that it stays closer to the actuality of what has become this village, which is an economy based on tourism, recreation, and I think we should add in our handy language a third element, which is the arts as an economy, or the arts economy. Those three legs, I think, all need encouragement and support, and that's what I'm hoping we will accomplish with these new tools.
Right, terrific. Liz Vail, as the village attorney, so comparing this new approach to the form-based code approach that the village took initially, legally speaking, is there a benefit to this new approach over the old approach? Does it put the village in a stronger position legally to enforce?
I think so. In my opinion, it's better to move forward with the existing code and amend the existing code as it's written. It's clearer. You don't have to keep relaying back to a separate code provision which outlines many different sections that may or may not be contrary to what's already in the existing code. So by amending just the existing code, it's still the one clear document that guides the zoning in the village. Yeah.
Okay, Bob, as a village trustee, when you're evaluating. That was kind of cool, actually, yeah. As a village trustee, when you're evaluating this new waterfront code, what are the concerns you have? What are the things that you're keeping an eye on that maybe you have some concerns about?
Thank you, Joe. I would say that I'm concerned about the long-term legal validity, if that's the right word, of what we're proposing. I think that there's this unknown force, I'll call it. We all know about some developers, and we don't know who they are, what they are, et cetera, et cetera. But I also feel that they are the kind of people who come with a lot of legal firepower. And if things don't go their way, then I think we can be assured that we'll be sued, and maybe we'll be sued anyway. But so to Liz's point, we want to try to do it carefully and so that we can withstand legal scrutiny. And in essence, we're walking the line there between personal property rights and the overriding benefit to the village, which is somewhat subjective. But that is what I see as the most important thing. And I also think that this is, in essence, was, personally, I think it was a direct reaction to the condos that were built. That's the way I see this. And we don't want that to happen again. So that's another thing. That's done. I understand that. But we want to try to prevent that. And that's another one of my main concerns here. And so it's really those two things. And that's my position.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Now, Egosi, your property was not included in the waterfront district in the earlier conversations, and it is now. In a real-world sense, what's the impact on you? Are you unhappy about that, happy about that? Does it have an impact on the way you view the future of your business?
I was actually happy that it was included, and I was very much disappointed.
You hold it too close to your body.
Is that what it is? Fair enough. You know the mics, so I'll stay.
So I was actually happy it was included. I was disappointed that the earlier versions of the overlay had a narrow view of what Sag Harbor's waterfront is. We are on the water, and the waterfront continues all the way around the harbor. In fact, Sag Harbor is a harbor. That's why it's got the name harbor. And we were either in it.
I'm trying to figure out a solution here. Maybe if I come over here. Sorry, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so the way I look at it is, as a business owner and being on the water and part of the community, we're either in it or we're not. And I'm part of the community and part of Sag Harbor, so being part of it made all the sense in the world. In terms of how it affects us, we are in what's called the RM zone, which is resort motel, so we're not in the office district, we're not in the village district, we're not in the waterfront district. So we are properly zoned for what we have, and we have lots of setback and lots of parking and all the things that you would expect to have for a hotel and what you should expect in an area that's RM. In addition to that, interestingly, when the village developed the zoning code and created the districts, the RM really was the buffer between all the commercial properties and the residential there to our east. And there's more commercial further east with the marinas and the radio station. So by extending the waterfront district overlay, the overlay district, out to the marinas, it made sense because it captured all the commercial properties, even if they're non-conforming.
Sort of missing Zoom at this point. No offense to everybody. Susan, you have come at this, yes, there you go. You've come at this, the whole idea of regulation of development from all angles. You've been on the ZBA in the village. You're a longtime land use attorney. What are some of the things you're looking for with this new code? What are some of the danger spots in enacting a new code in your eyes that mistakes the village might make in doing this?
I hope this works.
Yeah, I don't think it's you. It's not you, it's me.
Well, first of all, public announcement. I'm not licensed in New York, so I'm not representing anybody here except my own thoughts. I've represented big developers all over the country for years. I'm retiring this year, fortunately. But I want to say a couple things. The first one is the devil's in the details. And what I've been trying to do over the last few days is compare the June form-based code draft we got with the, it wasn't a code, excuse me, the June form-based plan we got with the current code. And a lot of the, what I consider to be good things, the things that I think could be added to the current code amendment are missing. And the mayor graciously, at the last hearing, at the workshop, asked that I make a list and turn it in, which I intend to do. That's one pitfall, is that we moved to a code amendment over a form-based code, which I appreciate, and thank you, Liz, and Mayor Larocca for doing that, because I'm not a big fan of form-based codes because of lack of specificity and the difficulty in enforcing them. And we have no big planning staff in this village, so it was kind of a ridiculous idea that we could actually have a form-based code. Again, my perspective. And the biggest, besides the details that I think could be tightened or added to and still meet the intent of the make code changes, one of the concerns I have is in 2008, 2007, when we started to amend the commercial code, we knew what the developer who came in wanted. It was a 15,000 square foot drugstore that sold groceries, sold gifts, not just drugs. So we knew how to respond. And we don't know what their plan is, the people who have done the assemblies. The rumor mill here is extraordinary. There's a rumor going around that Mayor Larocca has met with Steve Ross. And of course, he's a great negotiator, but it would be very helpful to the community and the businesses if we knew what their plans were, so we could better digest and make comments at November 9th, which is when the public hearing is.
It's difficult though, because
Real quick, if everybody can, there's a mute button on your mic, so if you're not speaking, just hit that button, and then when you're ready to speak again, hit the button, okay? So it just says, it's right there, but you don't need to turn yours off. When you want to speak, just hit that button and your mic will turn on, otherwise turn it off, that's causing the feedback.
yeah, it goes green. So what I wanted to say was that really is Mayor Larocca. At the heart of this, we before we move into the new proposal, I want to talk a little bit about the form-based code and why that failed. Why did that not work for Sag Harbor?
I felt, much as Susan perhaps felt, the lack of specificity. We have an amateur government, and our boards are filled with very devoted people from all walks of life, if you will, who are not trained in these matters. And codes are a sticky business. They're tedious and detailed and so forth. And I read and I was familiar with form-based from other lives that I've led, including chairing the Long Island Regional Planning Board, but I don't think it fit this community. And the burden it would put on our boards would be another level of pressure to make the decision-making even more subjective than it sometimes gets to be here when it shouldn't be. You want it to be as crisp and as specific as it possibly can be. And I just think that the concepts that are embedded in a form-based code require a much more sophisticated environment, in public environment for decision-making than we have. And we couldn't hire in enough talent to manage it, in my view. The second thing was that the initial proposal and the examples that were given of examples where this were working, my judgment, bore no relationship whatever to this community. How you would redo a shopping center in Tampa has no bearing on what we have to do here. So I was skeptical, and as I listened for that year, I became more so. So I think where we've really done a service here is brought it back to a crisper, more direct document within the overlay district, and I think maybe tuned us up for a little more specific work in our boards in the entire village, that we need to stick to the code, and these somewhat amorphous standards are more than we can manage.
Susan, if I can come back to you, I have two questions. One is the form-based code, you had said there are some elements of that you actually like. Does it have different goals than perhaps Sag Harbor needs? Is it more development-friendly, for instance, rather than being more about protecting something?
I was a big mixed-use development lawyer, and I could tell you.
Yeah. We have a CDC violation now.
Yeah.
We're going to have to get everybody, the hazmat suits in here.
We basically did big mixed-use projects, and when we came upon a form-based code, we hated it. And the reason we hated it is, for example, this June draft said large windows are prohibited. And so I wrote a comment, as a ZBA member, I wrote a comment and said, what's large? Is it 10 by 10? Is it 5 by 10? Is it inches? Is it feet?
Well, that's my second question. Is
That's
the
the
mayor,
kind of stuff that doesn't work.
the mayor made the point that for regulatory boards, it's a lot harder when you have less guidance and it's left up to you to interpret broad codes, right? I mean, it's much easier for a regulatory board when you have the rules laid out.
If you have a good planner and you spend a lot of money on a planning board associate who shows up at every meeting for every board, you can solve some of that problem. But we don't have a planning staff permanently. We have great consultants, but their time is limited based on what they're being paid, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it's complicated, but we don't have a planning staff, and it makes it particularly difficult. Can I give you
Oh,
one
sure,
example?
absolutely.
If you take the June edition, compare it to the current code provisions that are being suggested, there's simple things that could be done to tweak it, like the size of the stores or the size of the commercial uses in the OD district. In the June version, those sizes mirrored what was in the village business district. There's no gross floor area limitation in OD, and there should be. It was 2,000 square feet in June, and 1,200 in other use instances. But you can do that without changing the use code. So it's a series of things like that that I think need to be put in this current version and would be legally probably, sustainable.
Bob, I wanted to get you in on this. What was your thought about?
My thought about that was that form-based code is a recognized concept in planning. And I think it never really, it was sort of overkill in our case. And if you were talking about downtown Buffalo, 500 buildings, that makes sense. But we're literally talking about, a handful of sites. We're probably talking about less than 20, maybe 30 lots. And so I think a lot of the elements that were taken from that form-based code, which is namely step backs, sight lines, are in the new code. So they've been taken out and put in the code, which was the purpose of this in the first place. But that term itself got to be too. It was just sort of, as I say, it was overkill for our situation. And although I think it was well-intentioned, and I think that the good parts of it are still in here. And the one elephant in the room, as far as I'm concerned, is that everyone is dancing around architecture. And people have different opinions about that. Some people think that it should be traditional, others modern, others whatever. But there's really been no cohesive. We haven't addressed that cohesively, and I don't know if we can, actually. I don't think at a board level we can, and I don't know if we as a community can reach a consensus on what is better. Personally, I think good modern is better than schlocky old, if you know what I mean. But that's just my opinion, and others might not feel that way. But I do know that time marches on, and you don't want to have Disney World. The worst probably is just fake yield. And so, but that is an issue and a concept part of this whole thing that hasn't really been formally addressed. And it's going to come up. And it may or may not be it's not within the realm of this right now. But certainly in the real world, it's going to come up. And that is something I think it's a bridge we're going to have to cross when we get there.
And one final point, Mayor, I don't think it's a controversial point that was made earlier that the Bialski property on Water Street really sort of spurred this, right? I mean, that was an example of the code not accomplishing what everybody had hoped. Is that fair to say?
The answer is yes, and but there's more to it. There were mistakes made in the process that, as a sitting trustee, I missed, that others missed, because we trustees are prohibited from inserting ourselves in board processes below. The decision to treat the cupola on the Bruce Davis building, the top of it, as the measuring of the top of the new building, added 16 feet. If the boards below had followed the roof line of the existing building, which was the legal measure for what you could do in terms of footprint, height, and all of the important measures, we wouldn't have had that third story. In my judgment, that was a mistake. I'm willing to concede it was a good faith mistake by the people involved, but it was a mistake. The code did not require that, in my judgment. The second thing it did was that the Bruce Davis building fit on its lot with very little left on either side. But by law, that became the footprint of the replacement, if you will. And that's what happened. The new ones are just as close to the fence on the east and west ends and to the sidewalk as the original. But the third building, which was not part of the footprint that you were legally entitled to by buying buying the Davis building, was similarly situated barely a couple of feet from the property line, and worse, allowed the generator well to be built on the side of the building closest to the new park and literally to the fence. I think if we take the mistakes, hopefully they should have been avoidable mistakes, out of the result, it may still be troubling given the scale of the buildings, but it would be a lot worse, a lot better in terms of its fit and its impact on that neighborhood. But it was mistakes that were the bigger story and unreported as mistakes.
It also, I mean, it showed the stakes on the waterfront, right?
I had sort of promised myself I wasn't going to go back through this issue again, but I'll say that the ZBA, I voted against it, and in the meeting before, Tim McGuire was opposed. There was a headline in your paper, said ZBA questions height of towers. Mr. McGuire was sick, he had to step down. There was an interim chair put in to the ZBA, and then that was the meeting that we voted on it. And there essentially was not, that was not brought up again. And, you know, people have said there was sort of park mania or something, everybody didn't want to lose the park, and I can understand that. But the height was the critical problem. Those buildings are 55 feet tall. Code there is 35 feet, and that's 20 feet difference. Furthermore, there was supposed to have been, in both the planning board and the ZBA decisions, there was supposed to have been a sight line through.
55 feet tall.
What?
They have to speak out.
Oh, sorry.
For those buildings are not 55 feet.
Were they 54?
How tall?
Can you give us the height?
Yeah.
How tall are you?
From the grade.
You can refer to the drawings.
Well,
6 feet taller than the existing building. And we got multiple. No.
That's not the cupola, that's the
We're 6 feet higher than the original ridge of the
ridge of the roof now is 6 feet higher than the roof of the ridge of the roof of the original building. And then the cupola. That, just to be clear, we're talking about something different with the cupola.
The cupola on the existing building?
Yeah.
We're not taller than the cupola on the existing building. But that's not my point. The building is not 55 feet tall, so I'm today. So you cannot.
Yeah,
I mean, we're dancing around it, but what's the height?
I would say it's from elevation 7.5, which is the curve that's there now. I think we're 39 feet, 7.5.
39 feet from
I'll
7.5.
even say that the peak roofs that you see there, mast, air conditioning equipment, so I would say 42, so not 39, 42.
I appreciate that, thank you. Bob, you want to pick up your thoughts then?
well, that was it. It was that we objected to it. And I'm not, as I said, I wasn't going to rehash this because I think it's done. But the fact of the matter is we had serious concerns. And at the ZBA at that time, the way, when Mr. McGuire would take a position, almost always everybody would follow, generally speaking, not always. He would always, it was clear that this is my opinion, it was also my opinion. And I even said in the meeting, I said, in what universe do you call the cupola the top of the building? That's like saying the top of your building is the height of your chimney. It was ridiculous. The variances were granted for those properties. The last line says, and any other variances that might be required. Seriously. It means that they didn't even bother getting them all. And furthermore, as I said, there was supposed to be a sight line through the front two buildings, which would have been much nicer. And they should have been 10 feet, whatever, at least lop that top floor off. And then it would have been better. However, I wasn't going to talk about it.
Did you have anything to add? I just want to give you a chance to.
I will add that he's leaving out that we did what's called cluster development, and we traded back 60% of our development rights to have the extra 4 feet on the top of the building, i.e. the third floor. So it's not as egregious as he's interpreting it to be. There were many variables.
Okay. The point I want to make. Oh, go ahead, Nat.
So when I hear this conversation, it feels very academic to me and splitting hairs. I don't find it productive at all. Yes, lessons can be learned from history, lessons can be learned from mistakes, but we have something in front of us right now. And what we have in front of us is what's going to be potentially going to become law. And the question is, what's in front of us? Does it cover the things that we need from all the mistakes that have been made and all the things that each one of us personally have different opinions about and things that people have different perceptions of what's in front of us today. So yes, those buildings are there. There was a building there before that many people didn't like either, and that building got built from what was there before, which was a hotel. So I think we could just move on.
Absolutely. I wanted to set the stage to ask the question. Liz, maybe you can lead us through what I think is one of the key elements of the new proposal, and that is adding the special exemption, special exception that would be granted by the village board, which really gives the village board kind of a layer of oversight on larger projects. Maybe you can explain the details of that.
Sure. So we're creating a special exception use for a special permit to be issued for those uses and structures that are in the waterfront overlay district that are over 3,500 square feet in gross floor area. And then there are certain standards that the applicant must meet to obtain that special permit from the Village Board of Trustees. Right now, the code is set up so that the Village Board of Trustees already has jurisdiction over cell tower applications for special permits. So it's not something that's brand new to the village. It's already in place. We're just adding it for any and all structures over 3,500 square feet in gross floor area in the waterfront overlay district. And they'll have to meet these standards in front of the Village Board of Trustees to get their permit. And also, there's a requirement under the law that they have a hearing as well.
Mayor, can you talk about why this was important to include in the new proposal?
Well,
one of the reasons it was important is we tried it a few years ago, and we failed to write standards that met even a minimal legal test of how you would apply such a rule. And I thought then that we should have persisted, and we didn't. And so this was an opportunity to give us a tool for size that we don't have currently. And so why is it important? I think what I would agree with is that the the condominiums there now did have an effect on public attitudes. They're fearful that could be repeated. And but before all that, when we were looking at it last time, the concentration was on the kind of things we're seeing in neighborhoods now, where you can have a neighborhood that is evolved organically over time, not a subdivision, but there's this sort of a uniformity to size. Things fit together, even if they're different styles and periods of time. And somebody can come along and under the existing code and put a 4,000 or 5,000 or 6,000 square foot house right next door, so that the fitting into the character of the neighborhood, of all the things that can impact on that, a gross difference in size can be a real detriment, particularly the immediate neighbors, to the look and feel of the neighborhood and so forth. So it felt to me that this was a tool that has been used in other places, that we believed before we should have, and then we simply didn't put it together the right way. That I think we should be, particularly that it's in the hands of the elected government, to apply a limitation, but to provide for a reasoned process for exception if and when it can be justified.
So the way this works is, if the regulatory boards approve a project, the village board could still deny a request for a special exception, and that would end the process, correct?
The exception process is not an appeals process over what happens in the boards below.
It's just another step.
It's
Those
another
things,
layer of review.
that's right. Those things remain fully franchised, fully effective for the purposes they're created. What we would be doing is saying, if this thing comes through that process north to us with an oversize over the 3,500 square feet, we will apply the very careful standards that are embodied in this language. And if we determine that it doesn't meet those standards, we will deny it. And what a proposer, an applicant, a developer, builder, might do after that will be entirely up to them.
Right, they would need this special exception to win approval. But I guess my question then is, what is the difference? What do you bring to that review that your regulatory boards don't? Because that's why you have regulatory boards, is to review the code and make sure that a project follows code. Why would the village board need to duplicate that process?
Because the way the government process has evolved under the municipal law in New York, which comes all the way down from New York State Constitution, we create a series of regulatory boards that are almost by design in silos. So the Harbor Committee is looking at one set of matters. The Planning Board is looking at the site, but without much concern about perhaps the character. The ARB, particularly in the Historic District, looks very specifically at historic elements of architecture and so forth. The ZBA looks at all of that, and if somebody is coming forward and saying the way it's impacting our project is not fair or logical or whatever, there are standards to apply for a variance, which is another word for exception, if you will. And none of those boards is tasked, as the elected board is, with the total picture. We're the village-wide and the overseers of these other boards. We can't interfere, but we certainly keep an eye, or should be keeping an eye, on what they're doing. Are they getting it right? Are they getting the law right? Are they avoiding conflicts? all of those things that your municipal government should be doing. And in the places where this has been done, this is an additional dimension to all of that. And
Is that the legal justification, Liz? Is that the village board can provide sort of a big picture review after the regulatory boards have looked at all of the individual?
I think legally, the justification is that the waterfront is so sensitive, and that the development in the waterfront, where it's over 3,500 square feet, could have such more dramatic impacts to the property and the community character, is that it warrants an additional layer of zoning review, requiring this special permit by the Village Board of Trustees.
Yes, Susan, you wanted to add something?
I got it. I want to ask both the mayor and our great city attorney a question. Would it not be helpful if the developers in the commercial districts are required to contribute money to have a planning board consultant like Kathy Eisman at every board meeting, committee meeting, so that the information is transferred to the other board? I can just tell you, as a former ZBA member, it's a terrible handicap to not know what the Harbor Committee has said, what the ARB has said, and what the Planning Board has said. We ask, and our applicants at the ZBA are now under oath, which I think is extremely helpful. But we still need the other boards, all the other boards need to know what the other boards are doing. And we get delayed information. Sometimes we get it from the applicant. Sometimes it probably may not be right. Why can't we charge particularly in the commercial district, the developers for the cost of this planner?
Do you want to take that, Liz?
I believe the village actually already does charge developers for planning consultant review. And while that memo does get issued for and at the request of the planning board, it certainly can be shared with all other boards. And it typically is shared internally with ZBA and other boards. So we can make sure that happens for sure.
Go ahead, Nat.
Please do.
I want to go one step further, and this is beyond the Board of Trustees and the 3,500 square foot. At the end of the day, going one step further, once the approval is all granted, with lots of promises from the developer and so on, there seems often to be a miss where after those approvals, you then go through the building permit process, and then you go through the execution of the project, and then you get a certificate of occupancy. Oftentimes, the promises that were made 2 or 3 years earlier are completely forgotten and not implemented, and they're not even a condition of the issuance of a certificate of occupancy. They're not even a condition of it getting a building permit. So the disconnects that you were referring to, Susan, also transfer over to the building department. So when the building permit is being issued, there's no gate there that says, wait a second, this building permit can only happen if you do these 3 or 4 other things that are not even on your property. There may be some conditions that were given or agreed to by the parties that will be done off property, and they don't carry necessarily through. I don't want to cite examples, but those of you who've been here in the village who know very well how that process sort of falls apart as we go further along. Now, I understand you can do covenants and restrictions. I understand it can be conditioned in the site plan, but we oftentimes don't see that actually happen and doesn't materialize, and then later on it doesn't get enforced. So all the effort becomes for naught after many, many, many years of hard work.
Bob, I wanted to ask you, as a village board member, are you concerned at all, though, that now the village board, which is elected, is going to have a say in approving development projects? And the difference is, as you've noted, the regulatory boards are kind of siloed, and they're all appointed boards. Now you're going to have elected officials who run campaigns, and that opens up the possibility that you're going to see campaign contributions from people who have development projects. Does it open a can of worms? Is that something you worry about as a village board member?
Well, yeah, in my opinion, yes. I think it looks like a horse, and if it smells like a horse, it's a horse. I mean, if we have the power to turn down, for whatever reasons, a project which has been approved by other boards, have we not usurped their power? I don't see how there's a way around that. And I understand Liz said we are allowed to, technically, I know cell towers are within our purview. And so by extension, does that mean everything else is? I don't know the legalities, but I do know that it just strikes me as potentially usurping. We are supposed to set the code. We're supposed to write the code. We're not supposed to adjudicate any cases. We're not supposed to weigh in on projects. And it was my understanding when I was on the ZBA that that was our job. And so if the ZBA decided that this was okay, then the ZBA is okay with it. So yes, I have a problem with that. And I have a problem with the fact that 3,500 square feet seems a little arbitrary, but I don't see how the two, it's a matter of semantics. I think if we have, to finalize, if we have the ability to turn down a project which has been approved by multiple boards, we are usurping their power. And I don't see how a way around that.
Mayor, do you,
Can I ask
Susan, sure.
We don't have a process outlined about when it goes to the board. Is it after all the other boards and committees have reviewed it?
No, so there's no, under the law, there's no, indication or mandate that you have to apply to one board before the other. However, there are requirements that a planning board, for instance, cannot approve an application unless it complies with the law or has the requisite variances. So many times people will apply to the Zoning Board of Appeals first so that their application could actually proceed to other boards afterward and be approved with a final conditional approval. So there's no mandate usually it's up to the applicant to decide what board they're going to go to first.
Mayor, can you talk about this philosophically? Why this, how do you answer those concerns?
I'm not sure it's a philosophy question. First of all, the term usurp is loaded. This is not a usurpation under the law or practically of any of the functions of these independent boards. I don't know how many ways we can state that, but this will, I am absolutely confident, meets the legal standard for what we're trying to do. But relating back to where this part of the conversation began, how we're going to do our part of it. And I also reject the idea that the elected board, because of the possibility of campaign contributions, can be corrupted. You can make that comment about any level of government, and depending on how much cynicism you want to bring to the process, I am absolutely certain that it's not a problem now in our village government. Just look at our financial reports. None of us are spending any money in these campaigns from ourselves or anywhere else. Here's the thing. What we lack is an integrative mechanism for defining what we want our community to be going forward. We do not have a comprehensive plan. We've had pieces of a plan. We've talked about a plan. The last, and I don't want to look backward, but the last mayor ran on the promise of a comprehensive planning process. That didn't happen. So what we need to do, and is the next chapter in my attention to this job, is to go back to the 2008 study and plan, which is the closest thing we got. The combination of that with the current updating of the LWRP has, in the early going of this process, began to be referred to as the village's comprehensive plan. And that happened because we didn't have anything else. We need to have a comprehensive plan so that part of what we are looking at is that there's an overarching defining document that says what it is we're trying to do here. And one of the things I think would logically be part of that comprehensive plan is we don't want things to be too big. I think we say that in all our different ways, and we haven't institutionalized it in this form. So this is not what we would do in sequence if we already had that comprehensive plan. So a master plan for this village, I think, is an essential tool going forward and would give us additional things in our kit to manage the outcomes we want. We don't want to lose this waterfront. We're under threat. What tools do we have? Well, we don't have a master plan. We should have one.
Liz, I wonder if I could trouble you to just do a quick overview then of some of the highlights of this proposal. Obviously, it's expanded the waterfront the area that's being studied to
Correct.
include some additional properties. But can you just real briefly talk about what some of the other elements of the waterfront plan as it's proposed right now are?
So, as you addressed before, one of the biggest components was moving away from the form part of the form-based code, and one of the things that wasn't mentioned was that, the uniqueness of the development in Sag Harbor, one of the characteristics that's in every prior planning study is how unique the architecture is, how special that makes your village, and how important it is, and it also contributes to the historic district and those standards. So one thing that a form-based code does is that it offers you forms of buildings that you're supposed to replicate. And one thing that wasn't done in the prior study was typically when you're seeking preservation of what you have, you want to preserve what you have, that unique character of the village, you would do a survey, a planning survey of the existing buildings in the village, and then propose forms that actually emulate, look like, or achieve something in relation to those existing buildings you want to save or preserve to maintain your character of community, and that never happened here. So they moved away from the form-based code. That was a major component. The second component was establishing the 3,500 square foot review by the Village Board of Trustees, and then also just incorporating a second section of establishing the waterfront overlay district and incorporating standards from the form-based code that everyone seemed to support to restrict development in a meaningful way to preserve the character of the waterfront and put them in as standards in your waterfront overlay district.
So that
separate
whole effort wasn't for naught. There was some stuff that was
Absolutely,
pulled out of that
yes,
process.
yes. But then additionally, there was some comments from the Suffolk County Planning Commission that the prior form-based code did not address the pre-existing non-conforming structures in the waterfront overlay district, which the majority of structures, I believe, are pre-existing non-conforming structures. Therefore, we're seeking a separate local law we're introducing to restrict the expansion of pre-existing non-conforming structures throughout the village back to the 50% limitation that was in the code before. And that's another. And then, of course, also the rezoning, I'm sorry, everyone, the rezoning of Steinbeck Park to Parks and Conservation instead of Office District.
Okay, I want to open it up to the audience. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, I'll start real close by.
Really close. Okay. All right. So I understand that the way it's written right now on structures that are proposed that are over 3,500 square feet, that if ZBA, ARB, and Harbor Committee all go yes, 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 that then the VBOT can decide yes or no. They have like a final say. My question, and Liz, I haven't read in detail, or maybe I have and I didn't quite grasp it, but if one of those three says no, does the VBOT then have the power to come in and go, yeah, we think this is okay?
No, they cannot usurp or overrule or overturn your decision.
That sort of reminds me of the planned development district that the Southampton town had for a while that was a little more proactive. They could come in and say, we're going to allow this here despite what the other boards did. And it's worth noting that that's off the books now. The Southampton town did eliminate that. But this is not of that same cloth because it's just about...
No, that's almost incentive zoning, and it allows a project to proceed that doesn't comply to zoning at all. That's entirely different.
That's what it did, too. Sure. Susan?
Can I just add one comment to that? It seemed to me, if I were representing a developer, the first thing I would do is go to the Board of Trustees and see if I can meet the conditions that are proposed. If those conditions are met, then they have to agree to it. That sends a message to the rest of the boards about what the BOT is thinking about. So I wanted to state that because I don't know that anyone has brought it up, and that's either good or bad.
Is that good or bad? Bob?
I think that's good, and I think that's a good point. We talked about the order in which these applications are put in, and it's always seemed to me it's been somewhat haphazard, and you pick the one you might want to go to first, maybe you have the best shot at or something. And but that's a good point, that someone could start with the board, I guess. Is that correct?
But I don't want to speak for Susan, but I think her point is that sort of sets a tone for the regulatory boards, then it makes it tougher for them to say no, perhaps.
I agree, and yes, and that maybe usurp is the wrong word, but at least it's signaling to them something.
Okay. Liz, do you want?
Sure, I would just say that it's more than likely every applicant will go to ZBA first. To the extent that they don't meet any of the special permit standards which are in the zoning code and can be waived after applying the 5-part test, it's more than likely that every applicant will go to zoning first.
They'll
And
get
then, again,
variances
we don't
first.
dictate where people go first.
Yeah, variances are the first thing you need to get locked down, right? Did you want to add anything there? Okay.
Oh, okay. Two questions, if I may. One, Liz, about the 50% expansion for the pre-existing non-conforming. I wonder if in some areas that could have a negative impact. I know when we worked on the Harbor Heights gas station, for example, one of the ways we were able to go from 19 variance requests to 17 was that we insisted that since it was a pre-existing non-conforming structure, that it should be a diminution of use and not any expansion. So I wonder if in trying to solve a problem in one area, that we could be creating another problem. For example, the building on 114, which is just south of Harbor Heights gas station, I believe has some application, and that would stand.
Yeah, I don't think we want to talk about individual applications, but the broader question.
And the broader question, and then the other question is just, I'm wondering if someone could update us on the status of Bay Street.
Yeah, see, again there, see. The problem is, to speak for the panel, the elected folks on the board can't address any specific projects that are either, I think probably at this point,
Okay, I have one other question.
I'll let me let the mayor answer that first.
Bay Street has not applied for anything. So there is no pending application.
Then I still have a second question, which was, how do you envision the office district evolving? It's an unprecedented amount of space in the village that may be developed at a very, close time frame from one to the other. And it almost begs for an overview of, how do we see this district being developed in terms of height, scale, uses?
That's a good question. I think it's evolved a little bit, hasn't it?
Do you want to answer the 50% question first?
If you want to do that first, do that first.
So first, there was a limitation in the code that was taken out, actually, in I think it was in January 11, 2020, because it wasn't being applied equally among all applicants. And there's the 50% limitation has been in the code for many years. It's actually in every East End municipal code, and it's a 50%. It's a limitation on the expansion of pre-existing non-conforming uses, buildings, and structures, and it says you have to limit it to 50% of the gross floor area of such building or structure actually devoted to the non-conforming use on the effective date of the use having first become non-conforming. And then it has standards that you have to meet, provided that all parking and truck loading requirements are complied with. There shall be no change in the nature or character of such non-conforming use or such building or structure. And the lot coverage density shall not be greater than would have been permitted by the most restrictive lot coverage and density provisions in the district applicable.
Can you translate for us?
So basically this limitation is important because it only allows the expansion of pre-existing non-conforming structures and uses by 50%. And it's actually been upheld by, I believe, by the appellate division in a Sagaponic case that was the town of Southampton. So it's something you want to restrict and you want to have in your code to make sure that pre-existing non-conforming uses and structures don't get much larger beyond that amount.
But they can get 50% larger?
Typically, they can, yeah. It depends. It needs to be reviewed. It's a review by the Zoning Board of Appeals. The Zoning Board of Appeals can allow up to 50%, provided they meet those other standards.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's not just a given.
Let me ask the question then about the office district and how we picture that. Go ahead, Susan.
One of my primary concerns about the office district is the fact that the groundwater is 3 feet, 3 inches, I'm not sure exactly, below the land. It used to be an old wetland, and how the development of that will affect the hardware store and the other stores that back up to it.
And the experience I've had with the cinema is we built the cinema in a bathtub because of that problem. It's a 4-foot bathtub. And we also put in submarine doors. We had the opportunity to rebuild the facility, so we had an advantage. But the floodplain issues in that back area, you can't use dry wells. You can't even use rain gardens successfully, is a tremendous problem. And I'd like to see the village hire a very, very good floodplain engineer before development occurs. That would be ideal, to address those issues before we create a really awful problem for the existing businesses that back up to it.
Nat, did you want to say something?
With regard to the particular area we're describing, that area is significantly underserved by any village public improvements. It's not connected to sewer, there aren't sidewalks, excuse me. There isn't available parking for those. Yes, the municipal lot is right across the street, but it's not for that area. It's for the other purposes we use. And as you've mentioned, all this water has got to go somewhere, which it needs to connect to a pipe and get out to the bay. And that's just more infrastructure besides the sanitary sewer connection. One of the things that I enjoy seeing in the waterfront, this waterfront overlay code, are specific requirements to be able to connect to the sewer on the sanitary side, but without any stormwater sewer to connect, there's no answer to that question other than running a new line and getting out to the bay. And of course, those of us that are connected to the stormwater know that when tide is high and when there's a lot of rain, it backs up, and that's not always a solution either. So these areas that are environmentally sensitive are, in part, I think, why the Waterfront Overlay Code has a lot of merit, because there are some environmental considerations here. We talked about height of building, we talked about visual access. There's also the environmental sensitivity of the water that's around us here. And on the planning side, typically they're looking at land use, but we are in a situation where we have land and water and how the two interface, and basically protecting the water is basically our obligation here in Sag Harbor.
Mayor, do you want to answer that? It's going to be an increasing question as we move forward with climate change.
Well, the easy answer to your question, what are we going to do about development in the Office District? How are we going to manage it? The answer is very, very carefully, because these are all very accurate portrayals of the problem. We do have some work being led by our colleague Hayden Korish, dealing with drainage and other issues in those properties in association with the work that's going on with the town. So there is attention to it. But yeah, these are the real problems. Whether or not they're solvable remains to be seen. But the process, again, we like very much the idea that the village has grown organically, mostly without big plans over time. And when the people first came down from Buffalo to tell us how to do this, the point I made to them, we may have blundered and stumbled and bumped around for 2 centuries, but you're here because everybody else is here. Somehow we got most of it right. So we don't want to do anything to inhibit the organic growth that has made us the community we are. Nevertheless, when you see an opportunity like that district to the west now, a bridge, roads, and so forth, those properties, that's an important challenge for us. And I don't know how that'll come out, but it's an opportunity, perhaps. Certainly, sewage would have to be, connections would have to be a big part of that. But it may well be an area where affordable housing with ground floor retail or ground floor commerce with a couple of stories of affordable housing. There's a lot of programs. We're looking at all that. The initiative that Bob and Ed Hay are leading for us, and looking at all those opportunities. But we'd be kidding you if we had the answers to all these questions at this point. We don't.
They're on your mind. Right. Can I, Bob, you want to say something?
Yeah, well, I just want to say it. I think Susan, it's a great point. I mean, connecting to the sewer treatment plant is the least of their problems. And there is newer technology available. The plant in its current location can be upgraded. It can handle more. So at the moment, the capacity is not the immediate problem. It's more or less like logistically, how do you go about who goes first kind of thing. But then secondly, to Susan's point, once that becomes impermeable, that surface back there, where does the water go? And I don't even know if is it legal to pump groundwater into the bay? I mean, let's just say theoretically that's what their solution was. Just put in storm drains and pump it
I
out.
can just tell you that we were told at the cinema that we had to connect to the pipe that took the water to the bay. And we pointed out that the pipes are already full, always full. And the mayor, I think, is doing a better job of seeing that it's properly cleared out with brush and stuff. But that pipe goes to the bay. I can't answer the legal issue. I just know that it is a huge issue, and to allow construction there before we have the solution is backwards, because we have a developer who has purchased a large amount of land. It won't grow organically. It's going to grow suddenly, and we don't know the plan. And so we're kind of operating in the dark, unlike 2008 when we knew that there was a 15,000 square foot box that was going to show up. But that, to me, is one of the biggest issues that we have not properly addressed.
Well, I would just say that, upon the application of anyone, they would still have to undergo review under the State Environmental Quality Review Act, under SECRA, and that would require an in-depth examination of just what they're talking about here, the impact to water, the impact to groundwater. So that will be
part of the process. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
This regards the map itself that is proposed at the moment. I'm wondering, having heard that the Sag Harbor Yacht Club has part of its dock beyond that map, whether you have to change the map at all as the situation is at the minute. Does the map need to be redrawn for this waterway?
The map doesn't need to be redrawn, but I think the club has raised a valid question about that very specific matter. What we have there is of the marina docks that are part of the club, this is the one that houses their small building and their fuel dock. And we've had at least one example in recent times of that being part of requiring a response from the fire department for a problem on that location. So it was drawn in, I think, based on the fact that there is a structure on that particular dock. So, but it was raised to us, as you know, just the other day by the yacht club. We'll take a look at it, but there's a valid reason for extending it. We're not particularly in the business of including all the docks. We don't need to, from a development point of view. There are other jurisdictions that deal with siting of docks and piers and all that. But in that particular case, it was a fair question that was raised, and we're looking at it.
Let me see, is there anybody else over here? Any questions?
Oh, yeah, you're right, okay. So I hear a lot of comments here, waterfront, waterfront, waterfront. Nothing is more precious to us than the waterfront, right? But then I also hear that the ZBA should have first dibs on any application. And I'll tell you where I think that, yes, okay, so I'm Harbor Committee, so I do have a vested interest here. But I think that any property, any application that comes in that's within 150 feet of the waterfront should come to the Harbor Committee first. And there have been a couple of instances where we have been last on the ladder and we just had to eat it, all right? And I disagree with that. I think that the ZBA does a good job and it protects the privacy of neighbors. And I don't know what else it does, but it does. It protects the privacy of, the neighbors to the north, south, east, and west. But I think what we're talking about with Harbor Committee is we are preserving our waterfront. And when you have structures that are closer to the waterfront and the construction and the turmoil that's involved in that, that ends up being a problem for the things that we talk about here as being most precious, which is our waterfront. So I know I've had conversations with the mayor, I've had conversations with other people. I think that any application that comes in that's within 150 feet of the waterfront should get reviewed by the Harbor Committee. And there was an instance when that didn't happen, and the previous mayor said to me, well, did you reach out to the ZBA? I did. And the ZBA told me they weren't interested in having that discussion. So, anyway, just for your consideration.
I would just say, I would just say, I wasn't saying it's mandated that they go to ZBA first. I'm saying it's most likely that the applicant will choose to go to ZBA first.
Right, and
That's
I
all.
think that we should actually funnel them in those situations to the Harbor Committee first.
Can I ask what's the difference as far as the sequence of when a project goes before boards? Can you shed some light on that for me, Liz? Does it matter? I mean, as a civilian, I'm looking at this and I'm not sure why it would matter who sees it first, as long as everybody sees it.
Yeah, I mean, from an applicant's perspective and from the village's perspective, they're going to be seen by every board. But from an applicant's perspective, they're probably going to want to go to ZBA first, because the planning board, like I said, neither really can Harbor Committee. Most of the other reviewing boards, ARB, Harbor Committee, and Planning Board, cannot give a final conditional approval to an application that does not comply with zoning or have the requisite variances in place, right? So they cannot approve something that doesn't comply with zoning. That's not proper. So they're probably going to go to ZBA first, get their variances, and then go to the other boards. To the extent that another board changes the plan or requires different placement of a structure or more of a buffer or whatever have you, they are then required to go back to ZBA and amend their plan and change the variances accordingly. So it's not as though ZBA is binding all of these other boards.
Well, I just say that I think that that's not really fair to the applicants, because they go through enormous money and time, investment in making these plans. So they go through these various committees, and then they come to Harbor last, and we go, yeah, but I'm sorry, you're only 52 feet from the waterfront, and that's your finished structure. That's not all the, the excavation that's going on even before that. So we're going to make you change all that. I really think that there needs to be some pro and con, even if they come to Harbor Committee as a discussion item, and we tell them what our views are, so that can be incorporated in their planning. Because I take nothing for granted in terms of how much money people put into the plans that they bring to our boards.
Fair enough. If I might, Joe, just
Absolutely, Mayor.
to be clear about something, there is a process for exception or variance based on the practicalities and the actualities that you encounter. But somebody who decides to come forward can avoid the ZBA entirely by not asking for any variances. So one might argue that, at least in some instances, the streamlined way to come forward is to do something that's in complete compliance with the existing code and work from there. So I think some of the shade you're throwing on this, Marianne, is that the idea that developers, builders, homeowners, it's not just big developers that we see, it's mostly not big developers that we see, have a lot of choices about what they can do and how they can go about seeking approvals. And we're not in a position to favor one or another, but there is an avenue if you don't feel that the code as written particularly applies to your case, where you can go and you can choose whatever route. And I think it will vary depending on what you're talking about. What's the variance you're looking for? Is it a swimming pool on a corner? Well, that's very different from a height problem. So I think what Liz describes is we're not dictating where you go first, but I think that choice is one that gives people who need permits more options.
I would just like to say that I agree with Mary Ann, they should go to the Harbor Committee first, and that we should try to mandate that if we can. And then secondly, I once again, the lack of a planner in the room, not a memo, but the planner in the room at every single one of these meetings would make the conversation so much cleaner, and the lack of communication. I know this is a small village, and this is not the size of a city that I practiced in with a head of full planning staff, but getting a memo that doesn't relay the conversation and the back and forth and any changes the applicant may be requesting at the last minute is not conducive to a good process, a less expensive process, and good decisions.
Well, if we let us be clear that there is a village attorney in every one of those rooms. And My colleague sitting with me here now also serves as the attorney for the planning board. So
I think that's great, but she's not a planner. She's just a really good attorney.
But many of the questions that arise are legal questions.
Well, let me push back on that a little bit, Mayor. Some of the questions that arise at those regulatory boards are about planning and about how different projects fit into a bigger scheme. I mean, that is part of what the regulatory board should be doing, and it almost seems like one of the complaints you have, and one of the, maybe, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe one of the reasons for setting up this special exception review is that the regulatory boards haven't been doing that well. The regulatory boards may well point back and say we haven't had really good guidance about what we should be doing in a larger sense as far as planning.
Well, but the jurisdiction defined in terms of size is a code matter. It's a statutory change that we're making.
Okay,
so it's
Bob.
not an elective choice.
Let me give Bob a chance.
I would just like to say that this initial waterfront overlay process was kind of, it felt at the time like an emergency, like we didn't really have the time. And these are 2-year terms for people, which isn't very long. The boards have, rollover, and then came COVID. And I think this has been distilled to in my opinion, is most of the good stuff is in here. I'm happy with that. But it is an ongoing process. If we want to stop and do a comprehensive village study like in 2008, it would probably take 4 or 5 years. We didn't feel like we could do that. We felt like, wait, we got to do something right away. And imperfect or not, seemed like it was better. And I agree that the firm from Buffalo maybe wasn't the right fit, whatever. But a lot of their ideas really have been incorporated in here. The step backs on buildings, various sight lines through. There's a bunch of that stuff that's residual from that original plan, and which I think is great. But my point is that we did feel that there was a sense of urgency, and we couldn't wait for a village-wide study. I don't know how long the one in 2008 took, but it must have taken at least 2 or 3 years. And we just didn't feel like we had the time.
I can make a list of, and I'm still working on it, of about 10 I believe important items that could be put in this new code that come from the January plan that was proposed. And things like front yard setbacks, requiring sidewalks and street trees, requiring planting areas, those kinds of things. The size limitations that weren't included that were in the June plan. I talked to a couple of merchants, and they did not know, for example, that the 1,200 and 2,000 square foot is not in this ordinance, the limitation, and it matters to them. So my message is, read the stuff, and please come to the hearing November 9th.
So we were talking about village attorneys earlier, and if I'm not mistaken, Assemblyman Fred Thiel is with us, and you were the village attorney in 2008, 2009 when the last code revision took place, correct? Can you shed some light on the process and maybe offer some feedback on what are the things to be looking out for this time around? What did you learn that time?
Not to be the village attorney anymore. What I would say, when you're looking at the code, first of all, get plenty of public input. And, this is a small village. Everybody has an opinion. Make sure that, the community is very much involved. And, the thing I would say, there was this discussion about this code amendment versus the form-based code. I think what is good about this approach and why I like this particular approach, and, we'll flesh out all the details. There'll be a hearing and the public will have their input, is that, my experience is that people want some certainty in their land use regulations. And Jim Larocca knows this better than anybody because he was at the LIA when we did the Pine Barrens Act, many years ago. And the underlying theme of that was the developers wanted to know where they could build, and the environmentalists wanted to know what was going to be protected. Everybody wanted certainty, and I think that's the same here. The community wants certainty. They want to be able to know that the things that they love about the waterfront
the visual impacts, the access to the water, that those things are going to be there. And if somebody owns a piece of property in the village, they're going to want to know, and as well as their neighbors, they're going to want to know what can they build and what they can't build. And so I think that this approach, has the best chance of providing that certainty for everybody, so they know at the end of the day, what the rules are and what they can expect. And the other thing that I would say is that zoning codes, the zoning law itself, is a blunt instrument. It tells you generally what you can do. And regardless of what zoning amendment you have, and I've had this where people say, we want you to write a zoning amendment that makes sure that that never happens, or that this never happens, that we, and you can't do that with the code. The code, as I said, is a blunt instrument. Regardless of how the code is written, you've got a planning board, you've got a zoning board, you've got the harbor committee, you've got the historical preservation and the architectural review board. They all have discretion. And, there's always this argument, you want to have a good code and you want to have good boards. And my experience has been, I've dealt in places where the code wasn't so good and the boards were great. And the result was great, because good boards who exercise their discretion properly, will get you better results. If you can have a good code and not have good boards, and how they exercise their discretion is important. So all I'm trying to say is this code is extremely important. I think we're on, the right path. This is the right approach. I think this is a better approach. We'll get public input. It'll be a better product when it's all over. But just remember that every day there are boards in the village that are making decisions under these codes, and they have discretion, and they need the professional assistance that they can get, whether it's legal assistance or planning assistance, to help make those decisions. We're blessed. Everybody says, well, how well we've done here in Sag Harbor. Well, I think largely, not everyone has gotten every decision right. That happens. But, we have been blessed with people that have been dedicated to serve on these various boards, and they do a great job, and we get a great result. So the only other thing I would say, what did I learn from that process, is that you want to make a code that I think provides that certainty and standards that are easy to follow, that people can understand. But the other side of this, and I'm listening here today, and I knew you were going to ask me a question. I couldn't even remotely figure what that question might be, because I think we went through about 10 chapters of the planning and zoning textbook today, and it could have been on anything. But I just, we need to focus on how important these boards are. I'm an elected official, and I've helped and I've served for elected officials, and you spend a lot of time on the broad strokes that the code provides. What's your vision? First question, what's your vision? What are the policies that we want to have? But my experience is that what a town or a village or a community looks like isn't so much the product of the vision. The vision has to be there, but it's the individual decisions that each of these boards make on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday night that ultimately is going to determine what the community looks like. So again, these things have to interact together. You got to have a good code, but you want to give your boards the resources that they need to be able to implement it too.
All right, thanks, Fred. I don't want to put you on the spot, but would you be willing to give us sort of an architect's point of view of this process? That I'd love to hear from your perspective when and I don't know if you have any applications at the moment before the village regulatory boards. If you do, we'll just move on. But can you give some feedback on, as an architect working on projects, when you go before boards to try and get approval, how does Sag Harbor stack up? Where are some areas it could be improved? What are things that you can offer from your perspective, if you don't mind?
Sure. So Sag Harbor does a really good job with their boards. I mean, everyone complains about the result at 2 West Water, but it wasn't for lack of the boards doing their job. Where it comes down to is codes are law, boards are advisory committees, and are doing their best to interpret the codes. So You need good architects and good planners and receptive clients or owners. If everybody was respectful of each other, the result will be good. If someone tries to take advantage, 50% of the people will hate it, 50% of the people will love it. So I think our boards, they're not easy by any means. And if you follow the rules and you interpret the code, you'll have a result that's pretty good.
Appreciate that. Thank you for your time. Mayor, you mentioned in passing earlier that there's never been a time when the village has been under development pressure like it is. Is that fair? Can you put that into some context? Is this the most development pressure Sag Harbor has ever faced?
Well, I'm not a historian, but I can't imagine we've had a time where we had as many billionaires flying over the village as we do right now. So I think the manifestation of the pressure is that we virtually don't have a single building lot left in the village. We have upsizing where pretty much anybody can do it and afford it. And I don't think historically the different eras had anything like that much change concentrated in this relatively short period of time and all in one direction. Big events in the past have been the closing of the Vail industry, the closing of Boulevard and so forth, but this has been almost a singular event of every single piece of property being in demand. And I read just today in the paper about the lack of inventory now, which means prices are going up some more. I don't know if the census will show it or not, but whether the outflow of young people that we're seeing now had a precedent, let's say if we compared it to the census even 10 years ago. So it's more anecdotal and instinct on my part, but the manifestation of it is clear everywhere you look.
And Nat, I was going to ask you, from a business owner's point of view, a property owner's point of view, what's your position on all of this? What, are you happy with how this is progressing? What are you looking for?
Well, you asked me that question before. I want to get to the historical,
All right, go ahead.
Historical perspective, if you don't mind. So, as you were asking that question, and I was hearing the response here from Mayor, I was thinking also historically some of the things that have happened in Sag Harbor, and sometimes memories can be a little bit short, but for those that remember where Silly Farm was, and now is part of a town, village, park area, I think about 11 or 12 acres of real estate there. There was a developer that had acquired all that land and was planning to build condominiums and went through a very long process of trying to get approval, couldn't get anywhere, and then eventually decided wanted to put tennis courts with bubbles all along that. And you can imagine how popular that was in the village of Sag Harbor. For those of you who don't remember, I think he had 11 or 12 tennis courts there adjacent to our property. So at the end, we all know what happened. Developer went away, and the property was acquired, and it's been since a park. So we've had some interesting things here. If you go further back, the Bruce David building that was built used to be the Whalers Motel. It was a small little building. It was knocked down, and the large building was built there. The Bruce David, people call it the Bruce David building. Of course, Boulevard is a much more recent event, and there was a lot of discussion about Boulevard, about the environmental hazards that are there, the construction, a lot of fear, a lot of concern. There was a very long development process, and there was a lot of money built into that development project. And I even think about Rose Apartment, which I think it's called now Harbor Close Condominium or something like that, but I only knew it as Rose Apartment when that got built. So we've had a variety of things that have been happening in the village at different points. Maybe what's a little bit different now is just a number of them happening in a very short period of time, and also how we communicate. We communicate at a very fast speed, as Trustee Plumb mentioned. We have a certain sense of urgency. Information travels very fast, like extremely fast. So we sense we have to move very fast as well. So maybe that's more the issue, overlaying on top of the amount of development and people flying around with billions of dollars in their pocket and not necessarily knowing what to do with it.
Gotcha. Last call. Anybody have a question that you want to ask?
Can I comment on that?
Sure, absolutely.
The mayor said it anecdotally, but I think we are under the greatest developmental pressure we've ever been under. And, you know, we're in a period where, billionaires, it used to be people that came out for the summer. It's billionaires. There's a report from Tom DiNapoli, the state comptroller, record profits on Wall Street for like the third year in a row, record profits on Wall Street. The real estate economy out here has always been tied to Wall Street, always, and there's record amounts of money that are being made. Interest rates are somewhere between 0 and 0. Record low interest rates, and you add upon it the pandemic and things that were going on in New York City. The Community Preservation Fund, which would generate about $90 million a year, in the last 12 months has generated $220 million. So, it's a combination of factors. It is incredible amounts of wealth and money that's looking for some place to go, and this is where it comes. It's historically low interest rates that make, this kind of investing and putting money into real estate very, very attractive. And then the pandemic, which I think has just accelerated trends that were already out there. And that is why we are in a period where I think the village has never been under greater development pressure.
Mayor, the waterfront plan really has to just be the start, right? You talked about the fact that the village really doesn't have a lot of planning there's a bigger project here, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. And we didn't touch on affordable housing today, but that's one side effect of what we just went through, is I had the idea we could mandate affordable housing, maybe on the block that's been assembled. We can't, as a matter of law. What we can do is throw a wider net and put in place some statutory change that would help and incentivize affordable housing, but it has to be village-wide. And the term that gets used now is floating affordable housing, which means simply that wherever there might be an opportunity, we should, to the extent we can influence these things statutorily, we'll do that. So one of the things we are beginning now is to look at the affordable housing thing from the many points of view that Bob and Ed are leading, but also just in terms of sheer code and what we have in place. Beyond that, I think we have to come back to the oft-promised comprehensive master planning process. I don't have a budget for it yet. I don't even have a design for it yet. We've been concentrated on this. But I think that's an important part of what we do in this period of time. Because with an overarching common vision of where we're trying to get to, what we're trying to protect, what we're trying to nourish, how do we do it, I think that will help all of these processes we've been laboring about today, when there's sort of the manual, if you will, and that's something that has to come from the bottom up, from the community. What do we want next?
Bob, just speaking generally, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the next 10 years for Sag Harbor?
Well, I'm optimistic, but I'm also realistic in that Sag Harbor is a postage stamp, and there is limited space for all of these ideas. And I think that at some point it's built out. I think that at some point you cannot continue to grow outside, your pants are too small, whatever. I mean, it just, you can't do that. And so you have to have some kind of at least notion that that there's a built-in organic limit to what can be done here, and how that plays out and how that's decided is up to the board, up to other people. But I think that really has to be taken seriously. And parking is a perfect example. There are only so many parking spots. They're not going to be more. You can't make more ground. Therefore, it could come up to a point where if you did a study of all the parking, how many spots do we need? We need 2,500. How many do we have? We have 2,400. Hey, you're there. And it may come to the point where you have to say, no, you don't have parking. Or I don't like to harp on parking, but for example, it could also be infrastructure with the sewage treatment plant or other impacts. But I do believe that there is a finite limit. And it's not like you can just go and over here, over there. I mean, all the big affordable housing things that we're seeing are all great ideas, but they're all outside the village. For the simple reason there isn't any sizable lot that accommodates it. Yes, you can peck away, and you can do accessory apartments. There is actually in the code now, if you do a multifamily, you do have to have a certain percentage of affordable housing. If you don't, you have to pay into the fund. It's like $186,000 a unit, and we've done that. Most of it came from watch case. But in any event, the point is that we have to sort of peck away at that. But my bottom line is that we're limited like to this napkin, and let's figure how much we can put in here, because that's about it. Unless we expand the village perimeter to the fire district or something, which is not possible. That's my view.
Susan, I'll give you the last word.
No, I'll just make one observation. I think the day this code goes into law, you will see plans filed immediately, requests made for building permits immediately, and anything that is not in this code, we've missed the window. So that's my parting shot, because I can tell you that's what, having been on the other side with big developers, that's what they do.
All right. Good way to end it. I want to thank you all. This has been a terrific conversation. Thank you all for joining us. Liz, what's a quick timetable for when this is going to move forward?
So we have to wait for referrals from the Suffolk County Planning Commission and wait for the Harbor Committee to do consistency review. Probably, hopefully we'll get them back in December if the board wants to consider acting, would be the earliest.
All right, there's going to be a lot of public hearings and a lot of opportunities to learn more and to provide some feedback. I hope this was a step in that process. Thank you to all the board members who are here, the panelists who've joined us, and thank you to everybody else. Appreciate it.